there are people running towards me, detectives running towards me, and running towards the bad guys, and I'm going, F, 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 what is going on?
We've spoken a lot about how our viewers really like to listen to your stories, and as we've said, you've sent us a few in. There's one here that caught our eyes. You've only sent us a sentence, so we don't know the story, but you've written about how you nearly ended up in prison as you were trying to buy counterfeit currency in a Tesco's car park.
$1 million, wasn't it?
$1 million.
$1 million face value of counterfeit currency.
Tell us about that.
I get introduced by someone to this gang of criminals, and I'm not going to tell you who it was that introduced me, and you'll find out in a few minutes why not. So I get introduced to these criminals, and we have the usual sort of getting over the suspicions that people might have about one another, but then negotiations progress, and they progress pretty well, to the point where I am going to buy, yes, $1 million of counterfeit currency. That's $1 million face value, for which I was going to pay, I can't remember, forgive me, maybe, was I paying 10% or something? So then what was the dollar to the pound then? I'm probably paying some tens of thousands of pounds for this $1 million parcel anyway.
So when people sell counterfeit money, they're selling it for a fraction of the price. They want real money in return, because then the risk is then on the heads of the people that are then buying stuff.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely. And there's a lot of people got to be paid between me picking up that suitcase with $1 million counterfeit dollars in it, and that actually being turned into legitimate money. There's a lot of levels of risk. So we negotiate. Now, the governor of the investigating team, who are going to be doing the surveillance and making the arrests and all of that, he was otherwise committed that day. So one of his detective sergeants stood up into the role of being the operational commander for this job. And that's relevant. So at the briefing, I agree a signal with that operational head. All the team know it. When I give a signal, that means three things. Forgive me if I've told your listeners this before. It means three things. Number one, the contraband is on the plot. Yeah. Number two, it's safe for you to make the arrests. And number three, I can escape. So that signal means...
What is the signal? What sort of thing is the signal?
It could be anything from tying a shoelace, lighting a fag, blowing your nose, putting a hat on, taking a jacket off, scratching your head.
Oh, I got the money.
All those things. Could be any number of those things, but a lot of what I just gave to you as examples are riddled with danger.
Yeah.
Riddled with danger.
Yeah. Your shoelace comes undone. You're like, do you want you do shoelace up? No, I'm all right, actually, mate. Yeah.
So, sunny day, and suddenly your hay fever kicks in. Cold, wintry day, you got a runny nose. I know somebody who blew their nose, forgetting that blowing their nose was the signal.
Oh, no.
Right? That job went horribly wrong, as you can imagine. Right? So you had to be very, very careful about the signals that you would give. And I always knew that it was something that essentially to me was unnatural. So it was pretty.
That is not unnatural to Peter.
Oh yeah, we've seen you. I was doing the night fever dance, but we've seen your Twitter videos.
We've seen some of those appallingly embarrassing videos that I've posted over the years. So the day of the trade is set. I've gone to the briefing, told everybody what my signal will be, and I'm in Tesco's car park. Suddenly, the bad guys come along. There's been lots of negotiating and meets and all that. The bad guys come along, and they deliver to me a bag. Fair play to these criminals, right? Fair play. It wasn't $1 million. It was $100,000. Okay? It was a tester. It was a tester to see if anybody got nicked, for example. It was a way of flushing out to see if this was a police operation. Very good idea. Very good idea.
But surely they'll still get nicked for that, won't they?
Yeah, but it's 100,000. It's a fraction of $1 million.
Yeah.
And, you can run any kind of defence. You can almost plead guilty and get a fairly short sentence for that kind of thing, rather than bringing the $1 million, which is worth a lot more and comes with a much heftier sentence. Fair play to them. So they come, give me the 100,000, and I go, all right, fine. Open the boot, sling it in the boot, shut the boot. And don't give the signal, right? Because it ain't the mill. They haven't brought me the mill, so I'm fine with it. And everybody's going to hang around and see if anything happens. That's what the bad guys thought. And they literally hung around in Tesco's car park to see if anything happened. Because they thought if I was undercover old Bill and they deliver a bag, all hell's going to break loose. So fair play to them. So I put it in the boot, and I'm standing there. And of course, I'm not expecting anything to happen. I'm expecting us all to just stand about there for a few minutes. They'll be happy. I'm not undercover old Bill. Yeah, and then they'll go off and get the other £900,000, which is parked up round the corner, by all accounts, not very far away from the plot. And $1 million in those days is a pretty decent trade. They're going to get some pretty serious bird for it. So there we are. And all of a sudden, there are people running towards me, detectives running towards me, and running towards the bad guys. And I'm going, F, what is going on? I have not given the signal. Right? So clearly, because they're starting taking people down and handcuffing them, I've got to have it off on my dancers, haven't I? So I've legged it across Tesco's car park, over a wall, uphill and down Dale, round the back of a factory, made me escape, and I'm fuming. I'm absolutely fuming because I did not give the signal. So we go back to this briefing, and of course, what have we got? A complete dog's dinner. I'm very, very angry with the operational head because he lost his bottle and called the hit. And I did what I had to do, sort of wrote up my evidence, and I kind of lost all interest in it, and off I went, and muttering very uncomplimentary things about him. A few months later, a few days later, I get told that they'd charged them. They'd charged them with conspiracy to supply $1 million. And I'm like, well, they must be relying on my evidence then. And I didn't always give evidence. I very rarely gave evidence. Very rarely gave evidence.
Was there a reason for that?
Yeah, because sometimes people would plead guilty. Sometimes people would indicate that they were going to plead not guilty, but then my statement would be declared to them. And they'd read that statement, which would run to 10, 15, 20 pages. And they go, oh, that bloke we met a dozen times. Oh, he was the undercover cop. Right. All right, throw the towel in, we'll plead guilty. So the opportunities when I gave evidence was I would imagine probably on about 10% of cases, I would think.
Right.
So it certainly wasn't the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So they charge him, and the court date comes around, and I'm asked to go to court, but of course I'm kept in a separate room. And now the operational head, who should have run the job, but wasn't there that day, came into me and said, right, they're all pleading not guilty to conspiracy to supply these counterfeit notes. The case won't really stack up without your evidence. And it won't, of course, because it was a complete dog's dinner. Would you be willing to give evidence, please? And he left the choice to me. And you're only going to get a reputation as being a prima donna if you say no. And in fairness, I knew they were going to supply the mill. So, I'll do my job and I'll go and give evidence, which I did. Now, the defence barrister was a guy called Mr. Black, and he and I had locked horns a few times before. In fact, he used to know if it was a Bleksley case because he knew my style of writing in the statements and, the language I would use and all of that. And I think he jokingly said to the operational head, he said, yes, I expect to see Mr. Bleksley at some stage during the proceedings. So, yeah, I'll give evidence. Croydon Crown Court. Judge McHale, his name was. I'm never going to forget that.
You got a good memory. You remember all the deets.
Well, bearing in mind, I can't remember what I had for breakfast this morning. I'm pleased with that. So I give my evidence. Essentially, what the defence then do is they go on a fishing exercise to try and expose the informant who originally introduced undercover cops to this gang, because they know, the defence barristers know, that the police will throw the towel in rather than expose an informant
Mm.
publicly in court. Okay, they'll just collapse the case and walk away, and the defence know that, so that's what they're aiming at. So I give my evidence. I had 5 days in the witness box, right? 5 days back to back, getting grilled because there was about 4 or 5 defendants, and they've all got a barrister, and they all want to put me through the mill, as opposed to buying the mill, which was what I was trying to do. Sorry, young people, if you're not familiar with that expression of being put through the mill. So I'm having a right old ding dong in court, and I'm trying to keep my cool. But essentially, the judge turns round and says, "DC Bleksley, you will tell the court the name of the person that introduced you to the bad guys." And I said, "Your Honour, with all due respect and being well aware of the potential consequences, I'm not going to do that." He said, "You will." He said, "I am ordering you to tell the court the identity of the person that introduced you." I went, "Your Honour, I hear your question. I don't want to show any disrespect to you, the court, the criminal justice system, but I am not going to answer that question." He is doing his nut. Crown Court judges are not generally in the business of having witnesses refuse to do what they're told to do.
Uh-huh.
I get slung out of the court. There's a big legal argument as to whether the case should continue or this, that, and the other. And it was overnight. So then I go back in court the following day. Messages come out. Now, of course, if I continue to not answer the question, then I could well be held in contempt of court, which means that I would go to prison. So discussions overnight about all of that. Well, I've started. I'm not about to, I said I'm not going to change my mind. They'll have to send me to prison if need be. So I go back in the following morning, and the judge says, "DC Bleksley, I know there have been consultations overnight to which you were a party." He said, "And now I ask you this for the 3rd and final time. Who introduced you to the criminals?" "Sorry, Your Honour, I'm not going to tell you." He went beetroot red, right? He was absolutely fuming. I subsequently found out he'd been nicked for drink driving a few months beforehand, so he hated the old bill anyway, right? Well, so I was told, Judge McHale, if you're still alive, wouldn't want to get sued or anything. That's what I was told. I couldn't second source it like a responsible journo. I'm sorry, but that's what I'd been told, allegedly, apparently,
allegedly,
possibly, maybe. Anyway, he absolutely did his crunch, and he said, right. He said, "Well, in that case," he said, "I will not hand down punishment now for contempt of court because I feel that should be at the hands of another judge. But I will, of course, upscale this matter immediately to the Director of Public Prosecutions for the consideration for you to be sentenced." So the prosecution barrister, in other words, the barrister that's kind of like on our side, stands up and he says to the judge, he says, "Your Honour," he said, "now, about the matter of bail, right, for me, right?"
Wow.
And the judge says, "No, no, 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 no." And so for a minute I thought, right, I'm going straight down the cells now, right? He said, "No, no, 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 no." He said, "No need to discuss that. He can be released." It's like, oh, phew. But for a moment, like, my heart was in my mouth, and I thought, shit, I didn't bring my toothbrush with me today.
It's an awkward chat when you're sat in the cells next to the guys you've arrested.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Share a van.
Hey, places we meet.
Yeah. Where do I know you from?
Wow.
So what then happens? The case collapses, right? Because the defence then stand up and say, "Well, it can't be a fair trial if I won't tell them." And of course, the judge agrees.
Mm-hmm.
They were completely wrong. The judge was wrong, in my opinion. Case gets crushed, and they all walk out the dock, don't they? Right? As happy as Larry, right? They are whooping, cheering, dancing, shouting, and they're all about 15 yards away from me outside the court, right? And one of them, right, an old school villain from South London called Reggie Jones. who was proper, bless him, and I mean it when I say that. You know, he was a criminal that I could have some respect for. Let me say that. So Reggie shouts over to the officer in charge of the case called Simpson. He goes, "Oi, Simpson." Simpson goes, "Yeah, what?" He says, "That Peter Bleksley." He said, "Oh yeah, that's another thing I meant to tell you. The judge made me give evidence in my own name. Wouldn't let me give my evidence in a false name. That happened at the start of the 5 days."
Well, that backs up why you don't want to be given anyone else's name then, because they'll come and find you, won't they?
Well, I mean, thanks very much, Judge. And it was at that point they said, you can stop giving evidence if you don't want to give it in your real name. And I went, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. So, yeah, sorry, I forgot that rather important detail about how me and the judge had not exactly seen eye to eye right in the very first instance. Anyway, so Reggie Jones calls out and he goes, "Oi, Simpson," he says, "that Peter Bleksley?" He said, "He's a lot better than your informants." And Simpson goes, "Oh, why is that?" He said, "At least he keeps his mouth shut." Right, in terms of not declaring who it was that introduced me.
Yeah.
So I'd earned Reggie's respect because I'd stood there on principle, not going to tell the judge. Case got slung out. They were happy, but he respected me because I wasn't going to get, bullied by a judge.
Fair enough.
But then, of course, I had all those months to wait for the case to go up to the Director of Public Prosecutions as to whether I was going to get tried for contempt of court or not and get sent to jail. And it was, I guess, a pretty much straightforward, cut and dried case as on paper, because I had, refused to answer the judge's question on at least 3 occasions. But then I got called up to the yard one day and they said, "Oh, you'll be pleased to know the DPP has said it's not in the public interest to prosecute you."
Right.
No support, not that you were innocent, not that you did the right thing.
Yeah.
It was not in the public interest. Oh, well, thank you kindly. And I am staring down the double barrels of a sawn-off shotgun, which is about 6 inches, a foot away from my nose.